In this lecture, I'd like to talk a little bit more about demand elasticity, kind of get into the weeds and highlight some things about elasticity that most people didn't even know that they didn't know or that they could know. Now, to start out with, I'd like to talk about some of the economic factors that make a product more or less elastic. In other words, that influence the elasticity of demand for a particular product. One would be, does the product have a close substitute? Doritos and Tostitos are close substitutes, so if the price of one goes way up, perhaps I'm willing to substitute away and buy the other. That would tend to make my demand more elastic. Demand for individual products tends to be much more elastic than aggregate demand or industry-level demand. If I'm shopping for new tires for my vehicle, my Subaru, do I care about whether it's a Michelin or a BF Goodrich? I might care. Some people might care. But if the price of Michelin goes way up, I might be willing to buy BF Goodrich. On the other hand, if I need new tires, I need new tires. And so if all tire prices go up, I may not substitute away from tires in general towards something else. I really don't have a choice. I need to buy tires for my Subaru. So if the price goes up at the aggregate industry level, there's going to be less sensitivity than if it is at an individual brand level. So the second important point is that industry level elasticity tends to be a lot lower. And products with many complements tend to have less elastic demand. If you go into the grocery store around the time of the Super Bowl and you look at what's on sale, you know, we've all been into the grocery store and seen the big display that hits us right when we go in. A lot of times it's, you know, beer and chips. Pay attention the next time you do that and notice both of those items will be advertised as on sale, but one of those items will be really on sale, you know, maybe 30% off, and the other will be sort of nominally on sale, maybe 3% off. Well, it's usually the beer that's not on sale by very much, and the reason is it has so many complementary products that go well with it. So pay attention to that the next time you walk in around a big sporting event or Memorial Day or 4th of July, and you'll notice that products that have lots of complements tend to have less elastic demand, and that affects the pricing. Now, the first law of demand tells us that elasticity of demand will be negative. In other words, if the price goes up, the quantity will tend to go down, or the quantity demanded will tend to go down, so demand curves will slope downward. Now, that's not a universally generalizable or true statement. There are some goods that for which that's not the case, and these are goods that economists refer to as Giffen goods, G-I-F-F-E-N. These tend to be goods that are found at very extreme ends of the income spectrum, either extreme poverty or extreme luxury. And you can think of items that maybe in the luxury category, as the price goes up, they for whatever reason have more appeal and people's demand goes up. At the extreme poverty level, if you think about somebody on a subsistence level of income, perhaps they're buying only rice and once per month they are able to buy meat for their family. And then if the price of rice goes way down, they might actually buy a little bit less rice and a little bit more meat. In other words, because the price of rice goes down so much, it frees up some of their income and they're able to buy a little bit more meat. Those are kind of rare examples, but they do exist. But other than those examples, we will assume that the first law of demand holds and that the downward sloping demand curve applies to economically normal goods. Second law of demand tells us that in the long run, elasticity or price sensitivity tends to increase. A good example of this would be something like ATM fees. In the very short run, I may not be very price sensitive if I need to get cash out of the ATM machine, but over the long run, if I know that I have to pay a higher fee at certain ATMs than at others, over the long run, I'm going to change or alter my behavior in such a way that I more consistently take money out at the low fee or no fee ATMs. But you know, many of us have been in that example where we're at the ball game or we're at the concert or at the restaurant and we need some cash, and you know, the $2 fee or whatever it is, in the short run, we're not as price sensitive about that as we are longer term. third law of demand is that as price increases, demand curves tend to become more price elastic. In other words, elasticity increases. Now, this is true of all demand curves, and it's kind of a subtle point, but it's actually an important point. And the next slide is going to show a curved demand curve. This is actually a property that holds even for straight line demand curves, downward sloping demand curves. But an example of the third law of demand would be if we compare two products, sugar and high fructose corn syrup. So most people who've grown up in the United States have grown up drinking soft drinks that are made with high fructose corn syrup, which in the United States is much cheaper or tends to be much cheaper than sugar. Many people who've grown up in the rest of the world have grown up drinking soft drinks that are made with sugar, not high fructose corn syrup. In fact, you go to the grocery store and it's mostly the soft drinks imported from places like Mexico that sell for more because of all the importation that have actual sugar in them. Now, one of the reasons for that is farm subsidies and crop subsidies, which is beyond the scope of this lecture, but high fructose corn syrup, to the extent that it's a lot cheaper in the US or historically was in pretty high demand for many products. But as the graph here on the left shows, as the price of high fructose corn syrup increases, the demand goes down, and the slope starts to change. And so we see that as the price of high fructose corn syrup rises to the level of sugar prices, high fructose corn syrup consumers become more price sensitive. Why is that? Well, most people, when given a choice between soft drinks with high fructose corn syrup and sugar, will actually prefer the sugar to the high fructose corn syrup. In fact, many people who have grown up drinking sugar, when they first are faced with or taste a high fructose corn syrup drink, will actually are revolted. So the reason here that the demand elasticity changes is because there's a substitute product, which is sugar, and as the price of high fructose corn syrup approaches that, the demand becomes much, much more price sensitive. There are some other measures of elasticity, and the primary one that most economists talk about is arc elasticity or price elasticity, which answers the question, how much does demand for a product change in response to a change in that product's price? But we can talk about income elasticity. Income elasticity measures how much a change in demand, how large a change in demand arises from a change in consumer income. And so that's defined as the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in income. Inferior goods have typically negative price elasticity of demand. If my income goes up, I buy less of it. Spam, canned ham being a classic example of that. Normal goods have positive income elasticity, meaning as my income goes up, I buy more of it. Cross-price elasticities answer the question, if the price of one good changes, how much does the demand of another good go up or go down? So this is defined as, if we've got two goods, the percentage change in quantity for good one divided by the percentage change in price for good two. Substitute products will typically have positive cross-price elasticities. So Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. If the price of one goes up, then the demand for the other, or the quantity demanded for the other, may go up as well. So if the price of Coke goes up, then the demand for Pepsi may increase, or the quantity demanded for Pepsi may increase, even though the price of Pepsi may be unchanged. On the other hand, complementary goods, goods that go well together, tortilla chips and queso, if the price of one goes way up, then the quantity demanded of the other may tend to go down, and so have a negative cross-price elasticity. Advertising elasticity, it measures or answers the question, if I increase my expenditures for advertising, by how much does the quantity demanded change? And that's defined or calculated as a percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in advertising revenue. Let's look at a very simple example of income elasticity. Suppose that income elasticity for the Wall Street Journal is 0.5. So as incomes go up, there's a slight propensity among consumers to consume more of the Wall Street Journal, which would mean that as incomes go up, subscriptions tend to increase. So if real incomes in the United States grow by 3.5%, what does this tell us about the percentage increase in subscription rates to the Wall Street Journal? Well, it would be calculated as the elasticity factor, which is 0.5, times the percentage change in income, 3.5%, and that works out in this very simple example to be 1.75%. The fact that the income elasticity is positive tells us that as incomes go up, so too will the demand for this particular product, in this case, the Wall Street Journal. I want to thank you for listening to this lecture on some of the more nuanced points of price elasticity and other measures of elasticity of consumer demand.